Why do so many people drift through life, pushed around by circumstances, tossed about by other people's opinions, and whipped back and forth by their own changing moods, like a ship without a rudder in a violent storm? They speak of wanting change, they dream of transformation. They set goals on the first day of every new year, and yet they feel weak, powerless, unable to hold the course when the winds turn against them. James Allen, the great architect of character who understood the hidden machinery of the human soul, taught that the difference between the master and the slave is not talent, and it is certainly not luck or the circumstances of one's birth. It is the possession of a single hidden faculty that most people allow to atrophy in the darkness of neglect until it withers and dies: the developed will. There is a particular kind of pain that haunts the modern soul, a quiet suffering that rarely speaks its name, but gnaws at the foundation of self-respect with relentless persistence. It is the pain of feeling soft, of knowing deep within that you cannot stick to a decision once the initial enthusiasm fades, that you cannot control your temper when someone provokes you, that you cannot direct the course of your own life with any consistency or purpose. You have felt this, haven't you? That sinking sensation when you break yet another promise to yourself, when you reach for the distraction instead of the discipline, when you surrender to the mood of the moment and watch your resolve dissolve like morning mist under an unforgiving sun. We have been conditioned to look outward for solutions to this internal weakness, to search for the perfect system, the right mentor, the ideal circumstances that will finally make discipline easy and transformation effortless. We consume endless content about productivity. We purchase programs and planners. We rearrange our external environment, hoping that some magical configuration will suddenly make us strong. But James Allen, writing over a century ago with a clarity that cuts through the noise of our distracted age, taught that the only true solution is internal hardening, the forging of the self from within. He likened the will to a muscle that molds the mind, shaping it as a sculptor shapes clay. Without this developed will, you remain clay in the hands of the world, formed and deformed by every passing influence, every pressure, every circumstance that presses upon your unresisting surface. But here is the promise that rises from the ashes of this recognition, the light that breaks through the darkness of self-doubt. The will can be awakened. This sleeping giant that lies dormant within you, this hidden faculty that has atrophied through years of neglect, can be roused from its slumber and trained to serve your highest purposes. In the teachings that follow, you will learn the secret of the will, the precise methods by which this inner power is summoned and strengthened. You will discover how to take this raw, untrained capacity and forge it into an instrument capable of carving a destiny of greatness out of the chaos and confusion that currently defines your existence. The clay can become the potter, but only if you are willing to learn the ancient art of self-mastery. What you are about to receive is not merely another self-improvement technique to be added to your collection of forgotten strategies and abandoned approaches. This is the backbone of all spiritual and personal growth, the foundation upon which every other practice must rest, if it is to bear fruit in your life. Without a developed will, meditation becomes daydreaming, goal-setting becomes wish-making, and self-improvement becomes self-delusion. The will is the spine that allows you to stand upright in the face of temptation, the backbone that keeps you from collapsing when pressure mounts from every direction. Let us make a pact, you and I, a solemn agreement between seeker and guide as we enter this sacred territory together. In this video, you will learn the 3 daily exercises that forge an iron will, the practical disciplines that transform weakness into strength through consistent application. You will discover how to stand unshakable in the face of any storm, how to remain anchored to your purpose when the winds of circumstance howl around you and lesser souls are swept away. You will understand why some people seem to possess an unbreakable core, while others crumble at the first sign of resistance. And more importantly, you will learn how to cultivate that core within yourself. These are not abstract philosophies or vague inspirations. These are concrete practices drawn from the wisdom of a master who dedicated his life to understanding the architecture of human character. But I must warn you of something, and I ask that you hold this warning in your mind as we proceed through these teachings. There is a specific way of using the will that appears to be strength, but is actually weakness wearing a clever disguise. It looks like power, it sounds like determination, it even feels like resolve in the moment of its expression, but it shatters under pressure like glass pretending to be steel. Most people who consider themselves tough, who pride themselves on their stubbornness and their refusal to bend, are actually practicing this counterfeit form of will. I will reveal this brittle will in part 4, and when you understand its nature, you will recognize it not only in others but perhaps in yourself. For now, if you are ready to take the helm of your own existence, comment below the words, "I am the master," and let that declaration mark the beginning of your transformation. James Allen offered humanity a metaphor of such precision and power that it illuminates the nature of the will, with the clarity of a lightning flash on a dark night. The will is the helm of the ship. Consider this image carefully, for it contains layers of meaning that unfold with contemplation. Your life is a vessel moving through the vast and often turbulent ocean of existence, propelled by forces both seen and unseen, subject to currents you did not create and winds you cannot control. The ship will move regardless of your intentions. The question is not whether you will travel, but where you will arrive. Without a hand on the helm, the ship drifts with every current, spinning in whatever direction the waters push it, making no progress toward any destination of meaning or purpose. But place a firm hand on that helm, wrap your fingers around the wheel with conscious intention and unwavering grip, and suddenly the same vessel that was the plaything of circumstance becomes a precision instrument, cutting through the waves toward a specific destination. The currents still flow, the winds still blow, the storms still rage. But now there is a directing intelligence at work, a commander who uses these very forces to navigate rather than being helplessly carried by them. This is the transformation that the developed will makes possible. It does not change the nature of the ocean you must cross, but it fundamentally changes your relationship to that crossing. You become the captain of your fate, rather than a passenger tossed about in the hold. The will, properly understood, is the power of self-command. This is perhaps the most important distinction to grasp at the outset of our exploration, for it separates true strength from the counterfeit versions that masquerade as power in our confused world. The will is not about controlling others, not about dominating your environment, not about forcing the external world to conform to your preferences through aggressive assertion. These are the pursuits of the weak, the compensatory strategies of those who have never learned to govern themselves. The true will concerns itself with controlling the only territory that can ever truly be conquered, your own wandering mind. Consider how much of your life is spent in pursuit of external control that forever eludes your grasp. You attempt to control how others perceive you, but their thoughts remain their own. You try to control the outcomes of your efforts, but 1,000 factors beyond your influence shape every result. You seek to control the behavior of those around you, but each person is a sovereign being with their own will and their own path. All this expenditure of energy on what can never be held, while the one domain that awaits your governance sits neglected and chaotic. Your own mind, with its wandering attention, its rebellious impulses, its mutinous moods, remains unconquered territory while you exhaust yourself in foreign campaigns. The mind, left to its own devices, is a restless wanderer with no loyalty and no destination. Watch it for even a few minutes in meditation, and you will witness its nature directly. It leaps from thought to thought like a monkey swinging from branch to branch, attracted by every shiny distraction, repelled by every uncomfortable truth, constantly in motion, yet going nowhere. This is the natural state of the untrained mind, and it is the condition in which most people spend their entire lives. They believe they are thinking, but they are merely being thought, carried along by the random flow of mental content with no more direction than a leaf floating on a stream. The will is the faculty that interrupts this endless drift, that plants itself in the middle of the mental chaos and declares with calm authority, "No, we go this way." It is the power to choose your thought, rather than having your thought choose you. To direct your attention where you decide it should rest, rather than where impulse pulls it. This sounds simple in description, but proves extraordinarily difficult in practice, which is precisely why so few people ever develop this capacity. They read about mental discipline, they agree with its importance, and then they return to the comfortable tyranny of their habitual thought patterns without attempting the work of liberation. When you begin to exercise the will over your own mind, you discover something shocking about the nature of your current existence. You discover how little control you actually possess, how thoroughly you are governed by forces you never chose and influences you barely recognize. The voice that narrates your experience, the emotional reactions that color your perception, the beliefs that filter your reality, these have been running your life without your conscious consent. The will is the means by which you reclaim sovereignty over this inner kingdom, by which you take back the throne that has been occupied by unconscious patterns and mechanical reactions. This is not a single battle, but an ongoing campaign, not a moment of triumph, but a lifetime of vigilant governance. The untrained mind does not surrender its chaotic freedom without resistance. It fights back with every tool at its disposal. It offers rationalization for why you should abandon the effort, produces feelings of boredom and restlessness to make discipline uncomfortable, generates doubts about whether the struggle is worth the cost. This is why most people never complete the journey of self-mastery. They begin with enthusiasm, encounter the resistance of their own unruly nature, and retreat to the familiar prison of automatic living. But you must understand that this resistance is not a sign of failure. It is the very substance against which the will strengthens itself. Just as a muscle grows only when it encounters resistance that challenges its current capacity, the will develops only when it faces the opposition of the untrained mind and overcomes it. Every time you direct your attention back to your chosen focus, every time you refuse the invitation of a distracting thought, every time you hold your course against the pull of impulse, you are performing a repetition that builds the muscle of self-command. The difficulty is not a problem to be solved, but a weight to be lifted. The helm of a ship is not merely a steering mechanism, it is a point of leverage through which a small force can direct an enormous mass. A single person standing at the wheel, applying relatively modest pressure, can guide a vessel of tremendous size through waters that would otherwise sweep it wherever they pleased. This is the nature of the will in relation to the whole of your being. You are a vast system of impulses, memories, habits, emotions, beliefs, and reactions, a ship of enormous complexity sailing through the ocean of experience. The will, though it may seem small compared to this massive vessel, is the point of leverage through which direction becomes possible. When Alan speaks of the will as the helm, he is also reminding us that the helm is useless without a destination. A hand on the wheel that has no port in mind will steer just as aimlessly as no hand at all. This is why the development of the will must be accompanied by the clarification of purpose, by the identification of that toward which you wish to navigate. The will is not directionless force, it is directed intention. It is the power to move toward what you have chosen as worthy, to maintain course when circumstances suggest you should deviate, to persist when everything in you cries out for the comfort of abandonment. Consider how your life has been shaped by the absence of this directing force. The goals abandoned when motivation faded, the relationships damaged by uncontrolled reactions, the opportunities missed because discipline dissolved at the crucial moment. These are the consequences of a ship without a hand on the helm. Every failure of character, every betrayal of your own ideals, every collapse in the face of temptation traces back to this single cause. The will was not strong enough to hold the course. This is not a judgment, but a diagnosis, not a condemnation, but a recognition of what must be addressed if anything is to change. The beautiful truth hidden within this diagnosis is that the will, like any muscle, responds to training. What is weak can be made strong. What is unreliable can be made dependable. What is easily overcome can be forged into an unconquerable force. The gap between where you are and where you could be is not fixed. It is the distance that dedicated practice can cover. James Allen did not teach that some are born with strong wills and others are destined to drift. He taught that the will is a faculty available to all, awaiting only the decision to develop it and the persistence to continue that development when the work becomes difficult. To take the helm of your ship is to accept a responsibility that most people spend their lives avoiding. It is to acknowledge that the direction of your existence is your own to determine, that the outcomes you experience flow from the choices you make, that the person you become is the sculpture you carve with your own hands. This is frightening to those who prefer the comfort of victimhood, who find safety in blaming circumstances for their failures. But to you who are ready to claim your power, this truth is not a burden but a liberation. The hand on the helm belongs to no one but you. Let us deepen our understanding with another image that illuminates the relationship between will, thought, and destiny. Picture the blacksmith at his ancient forge, surrounded by fire and iron, engaged in the primal work of transformation. This is your situation, whether you recognize it or not. You stand before the forge of your own experience, and the question is only whether you will work the metal consciously or allow it to be shaped by forces you do not direct. Your thoughts are the raw metal, formless potential, waiting to be given structure and purpose. Your circumstances are the fire that heats this metal, the challenges and pressures of existence that make transformation possible. But your will is the hammer that strikes and shapes, that determines what form will emerge from the heat and chaos. Consider what happens when the blacksmith places iron in the fire but fails to strike it. The metal grows hot, soft, malleable, and then what? If it simply remains in the flames without the intervention of the hammer, it begins to lose whatever shape it previously held. It melts, it deforms, it becomes a shapeless mass fit for nothing. This is the condition of the person who experiences life's heat without applying the will. Circumstances press upon them, challenges soften their resistance, and they simply collapse into whatever form the pressure dictates. They had raw material, they had fire, but without the hammer's decisive intervention, nothing of worth was forged. The hammer must strike while the iron is hot, as the ancient saying reminds us. There is a window of opportunity when transformation is possible, when the material is receptive to being shaped. Miss this window and the iron cools, hardens in whatever random form it has fallen into, and can only be reshaped by returning to the fire and starting again. How many times in your life has the fire of circumstance heated you to the point of potential transformation, only for that opportunity to pass because the hammer of will was not ready to strike? The crisis came, the pressure mounted, the metal was hot, but the hammer lay unused and you cooled into the same shape you had before. To hammer your thoughts into the shape of your ideal requires first that you have an ideal, a clear vision of the form you intend to create. The blacksmith does not strike randomly, hoping that something useful will emerge from chance. He holds in his mind the image of the sword, the horseshoe, the tool, and every strike is guided by that mental template. So too must you hold clearly in mind the character you intend to forge, the person you are working to become. Without this guiding image, the hammer becomes meaningless. Energy is wasted in random effort, and no coherent shape emerges from the chaos of raw material and fire. The process requires repetition, stroke after stroke, day after day, until the shape begins to emerge. No single strike of the hammer transforms iron into a finished blade. It is the accumulated force of 1,000 strikes, each one building upon the last, that gradually persuades the stubborn metal to assume its destined form. The same is true of character and will. You will not become strong-willed through a single act of discipline, no matter how heroic. You will become strong-willed through countless acts of discipline, most of them small and unwitnessed, accumulating over time until the transformation is complete. Those who seek sudden transformation misunderstand the nature of forging. The hammer must be wielded with force, not the wild force of anger or desperation, but the controlled force of directed intention. There is a weight to each strike, a power behind the blow that determines how effectively the metal is shaped. A weak, hesitant tap does nothing but make noise. Only a full committed stroke moves the material toward its new form. When you exercise your will, you must exercise it fully, throwing the weight of your entire being behind the decision. The half-hearted effort, the tentative attempt, the commitment made with mental reservations, these are taps that make noise, but forge nothing. Heat is not a problem to be avoided, but a condition to be utilized. The beginner looks at the fire and sees only danger, only discomfort, only the threat of being burned. The master blacksmith knows that fire is essential, that only in the heat can transformation occur. Your circumstances, with all their difficulty and pressure, are not obstacles to your development, but the very conditions that make development possible. Without resistance, there is no growth. Without heat, the metal cannot be worked. Stop asking for easier circumstances and start using the difficult circumstances you have. They are your forge, and the fire is hot enough if you will only pick up the hammer. Every destiny worthy of the name was forged in this manner, through the deliberate application of will to the raw material of thought under the heat of challenging circumstance. The great figures of history, those who accomplished what seemed impossible and became what ordinary humans only dream of becoming, were not blessed with easier fires or softer metal. They were simply more persistent and more skillful with the hammer. They understood that the work is never finished, that each day brings new metal to be shaped, new heat to be endured, new opportunities for the hammer to do its sacred work. A destiny is not found, it is forged. This distinction matters more than you might initially realize. To speak of finding your destiny suggests that it exists somewhere outside you, waiting to be discovered like a hidden treasure or a lost artifact. This framing makes you a seeker, passive in relation to what you pursue, dependent on luck or providence to lead you to what has been hidden. But to speak of forging your destiny is to recognize yourself as the creator, the one whose actions bring into existence what did not exist before. There is nothing to find, because there is nothing yet made. Your destiny waits in the unformed potential of raw metal, and only your hammer can bring it forth. This shift in understanding transforms your relationship to the future from one of hope to one of work, from waiting to making. The person who believes their destiny must be found may spend a lifetime searching, looking everywhere but the one place where the creation must occur. The person who understands that their destiny must be forged takes up the hammer today and begins the work that will, through accumulated effort, produce the result they seek. Which of these people are you? Which of these people will you choose to be? The fire is already lit, the metal is already heating. The only question is whether you will strike. The blacksmith knows that the quality of the finished work depends not only on his skill, but on his persistence through the long hours of labor. There are no shortcuts in the forge. Each piece must be worked fully, shaped completely, finished properly. The temptation to rush, to declare the work done before it is done, to settle for a shape that approximates the ideal rather than achieving it, this temptation must be resisted if mastery is to be attained. Your character is your masterwork, the piece you spend your lifetime forging. Do not rush it. Do not settle for approximation. Keep the metal in the fire, keep the hammer in your hand, and do not stop until the shape matches the vision. There is a rhythm to the work of the forge, a cadence of heat and strike, of intensity and rest, that the skilled blacksmith learns to feel intuitively. Too much time in the fire and the metal is damaged, too little and it cannot be shaped. Too many strikes without pause and the smith exhausts himself, too few and progress stalls. Learning this rhythm is part of mastering the craft. You too must learn the rhythm of self-development, knowing when to push and when to rest, when to apply the heat of challenge and when to allow for integration and recovery. The will is not endless force, but directed force, applied with wisdom and timed with skill. Finally, understand that the forge is not a pleasant place. It is hot, loud, demanding, and dangerous. The blacksmith does not work in comfort, but in conditions that most people would flee. His choice to remain at the forge, to endure what must be endured in service of the creation he envisions, is itself an act of will. You too must be willing to work in conditions that are not comfortable, to remain at your task when everything in you wants to retreat to ease and distraction. The fire will burn you if you are careless. The hammer will bruise you if you are unskilled. But only in the forge can the sword be made, and only through your willingness to work there can your destiny be created. The great secret of the blacksmith is that he loves the work, not the finished product only, but the process itself, the daily engagement with fire and metal and hammer. He finds meaning in the labor, satisfaction in the effort, identity in the role of craftsman. If you wish to forge your destiny, you must learn to love the forging. Not someday when the work is complete, but now in the heat and the noise and the sweat. This is the final teaching of the forge, that the will is not a burden to be endured, but a power to be celebrated, not a price to be paid, but a gift to be used. Pick up your hammer. The iron is waiting. Before the exercises can be practiced, before the techniques can be applied, before any outer work can begin, there must be an inner preparation that establishes the proper ground for growth. The required state from which all true development of will must proceed is what the masters called silent resolve. This is not a dramatic declaration, not a shouted affirmation, not a public display of determination that seeks the validation of witnesses. It is something far deeper and far more powerful, a quiet decision made in the innermost chamber of your being that requires no external confirmation and seeks no applause. The person of silent resolve does not speak of what they will do, they simply do it, and their doing speaks louder than any words ever could. Observe the difference between the two types you have encountered in your life. There is the person who announces their intentions broadly, who makes sure everyone knows of their commitment, who seems to derive energy from speaking about their plans. And there is the person who says little or nothing about their goals, who works quietly and consistently, who reveals their achievements only after they are accomplished. Which of these has truly developed their will? The first draws strength from external sources, from the social pressure of having declared their intentions, from the fear of embarrassment if they fail publicly. The second draws strength from within, from a reservoir of determination that does not depend on anyone else's knowledge or approval. The noisy, shouting will is fundamentally weak, regardless of how impressive it sounds in the moment of its expression. It must announce itself because it lacks the internal substance to sustain itself without external reinforcement. It seeks witnesses because it does not trust itself to follow through when no one is watching. It makes grand declarations because small, quiet actions feel insufficient to its need for significance. All this noise is compensation for an inner emptiness, an attempt to manufacture through volume what is lacking in depth. When the audience departs and the echoes of the declaration fade, this noisy will often fades with them, leaving nothing but the embarrassment of unfulfilled promises. The true will is quiet, steady, and relentless. It does not need to speak because it is too busy acting. It does not seek validation because its validation comes from the work itself, from the daily accumulation of small victories that build into large transformations. This will operates like underground water, invisible on the surface but constantly flowing, cutting channels through solid rock through nothing more than patient persistence. It does not brag about what it is going to do, it simply does what it has decided to do, and then it moves on to the next task without fanfare or self-congratulation. To cultivate silent resolve, you must first recognize the energy you lose through premature speech. Every time you announce a goal before achieving it, you spend some of the energy that should have been directed toward the goal itself. There is a psychological satisfaction in declaration, a small reward that the mind accepts as partial completion of the task. Studies have shown that people who speak extensively about their intentions are actually less likely to fulfill them than those who remain silent. The speaking becomes a substitute for the doing, and the will is weakened rather than strengthened by the verbal commitment. Begin to practice the discipline of silence around your intentions. When you decide to make a change, tell no one. When you set a goal, keep it private. When you commit to a new practice, let your consistency be your only announcement. This is not secrecy born of fear, but discretion born of wisdom. You are learning to contain your energy, to prevent the leakage that occurs through unnecessary speech, to build internal pressure that will be released only through action. The person who practices this discipline discovers a new kind of power, a self-sufficiency that does not depend on the reactions of others. Silent resolve also means freedom from the need to justify your choices to others. The weak will constantly explains itself, seeks permission, asks for agreement before acting. It cannot move forward without consensus because it lacks the internal authority to validate its own decisions. The strong will makes its choice, acts on its choice, and allows the results to provide whatever justification is needed. This does not mean being closed to input or incapable of changing course when evidence suggests change is warranted. It means that the fundamental direction of your life is determined by your own inner compass, not by the shifting opinions of those around you. The quiet person is often mistaken for the passive person, but this is a profound error of perception. Passivity is the absence of will. Quiet is the presence of will so strong that it needs no external expression. The passive person drifts because they have made no decision. The quiet person moves with purpose because their decision has been made so completely that speech would add nothing to it. Learn to distinguish between these two states in yourself and others. When you are quiet, ask yourself, is this the quiet of resolve or the quiet of abdication? The answer will tell you much about the actual state of your will. Developing silent resolve requires practice with small matters before it can be applied to large ones. Begin with minor decisions and hold them silently, executing them without announcement or discussion. Notice the urge to speak, the desire to share, the pull toward making your intention public. This urge is the voice of the weak will seeking its customary support. Do not condemn it, but do not obey it either. Simply notice it, let it pass, and continue with your silent execution. Each time you successfully complete a cycle of silent decision and quiet action, you strengthen the muscle of internal resolve. The masters taught that words are containers for power, and that the power leaks out when the container is opened unnecessarily. This is not mystical obscurantism, but practical psychology. Your words carry your energy, your intention, your commitment. When you speak of what you will do, you open the container and allow this energy to dissipate into the air, where it produces only sound and not substance. When you hold your words within, the energy has nowhere to go but into the action itself. This is why the greatest accomplishments often come from the most silent people. They have learned to contain what others waste. Consider the image of the warrior preparing for battle. The amateur warrior makes noise, shouts threats, tries to intimidate through volume and visible aggression. The master warrior is silent, conserving every ounce of energy for the confrontation itself, revealing nothing of their intention until the moment of action. When the master finally moves, it is with a speed and power that the noisy amateur cannot match, because the master has stored what the amateur has spent. This is the model for your approach to the challenges you face. Be the silent warrior, not the shouting one. Let your enemies, whether they are external obstacles or internal weaknesses, learn nothing from your words. Let them discover your resolve only when it is too late to prepare a defense. Silent resolve includes the resolution to continue when no one is watching, to maintain your standards when there is no possibility of recognition, to do in private exactly what you would do if the whole world were observing. This is perhaps the deepest test of the will, for it reveals whether your motivation is truly internal or merely a sophisticated form of social performance. Many people maintain discipline only when accountability is externally enforced, only when others might notice their failure. The person of silent resolve maintains discipline because the discipline itself has become their standard, because they could not bear to be less than their vision of themselves even in complete solitude. The cultivation of silent resolve is not the work of a day, but of a lifetime. You will speak when you should be silent. You will seek validation when you should be self-sufficient. You will announce when you should act. These failures are part of the journey, not reasons to abandon it. Each time you catch yourself in the old pattern, you have an opportunity to choose differently. Each time you successfully hold your silence and act without announcement, you move closer to the ideal. The masters themselves were once beginners who spoke too much and acted too little. What made them masters was not the absence of weakness, but the persistent correction of weakness through the application of will. When you have established silent resolve as the ground of your practice, the exercises that follow will have their full effect. Without this ground, the exercises become performances, techniques practiced for the impression they create, rather than for the transformation they enable. With this ground, every technique becomes a true act of will, a genuine expression of the quiet determination that needs no witness to be real. Prepare this ground within yourself before proceeding. Let the soil of your inner life be tilled and made ready. The seeds we are about to plant require this preparation if they are to take root and grow into the mighty trees of an unconquerable will. Now we arrive at the practical heart of this teaching, the specific exercises through which the will is forged from raw potential into tempered steel. These are not theories to be contemplated, but practices to be implemented, disciplines to be lived rather than merely understood. James Allen and the masters who walked this path before us distilled the process of will development into actionable steps that any person can apply. What follows are 3 exercises, each targeting a different domain of life, each building a different facet of the iron will you seek to possess. Practice them faithfully, and you will transform. Practice them partially or inconsistently, and you will remain as you are. The first exercise is called the victory of the morning, and it is placed first because the battle for the will is won or lost in the first 10 minutes of your waking life. This is not exaggeration or poetic license, it is precise psychological truth. The way you begin your day establishes a pattern that echoes through every subsequent hour. Begin by surrendering to comfort, to impulse, to the path of least resistance, and you have set a precedent that your subconscious mind will follow when choices arise later. Begin by asserting your will over your immediate desires, and you have established yourself as the commander rather than the commanded, a precedent that will also carry forward. The practice is simple to describe, but challenging to execute. Immediately upon waking, before you check your phone, before you sink back into the warmth of your covers, before you give yourself permission to delay, do one thing that you do not want to do. The specific action matters less than the principle it embodies. It could be making your bed with precision and care, folding every corner, smoothing every wrinkle, transforming the site of your sleep into a demonstration of order. It could be a cold shower, stepping into the sharp shock of cold water when every nerve screams for warmth, remaining there long enough to demonstrate that you, not your nerves, determine what you can endure. It could be 5 minutes of meditation, sitting still when the mind demands activity, focusing attention when distraction beckons, refusing the invitation to move or scratch or adjust. It could be a set of push-ups or stretches, demanding effort from a body that insists it is not ready. The content varies according to your circumstance and constitution, but the structure remains constant. Identify something your comfort-seeking self does not want to do and do it immediately as the first act of your day. This sends a signal to the deepest levels of your psyche, a message that reverberates through every cell of your being. I am in charge, not my comfort. Understand what you are accomplishing through this practice. You are not merely making your bed or taking a shower. You are establishing sovereignty over your own being. You are declaring, through action rather than words, that the preferences of your momentary self do not determine the direction of your life. You are proving to yourself that you can do what you do not feel like doing, which is the very definition of will in action. Each morning's victory adds to your store of evidence that you are capable of self-command, and this evidence, accumulated over time, becomes an unshakable foundation of confidence in your own capacity. The second exercise cuts deeper and tests the will in a more subtle but more powerful domain, the silent restraint, specifically the control of the tongue. Speech is so habitual, so automatic, so woven into the fabric of daily existence, that most people never consider it a domain for the exercise of will. Words simply emerge, reactions are voiced, opinions are expressed, and it all seems as natural and unavoidable as breathing. But the masters knew that the tongue is the most difficult instrument to master, and that its mastery is the gateway to mastery of the entire self. He who controls his tongue, as ancient wisdom declares, controls his life. The practice focuses on 3 specific situations where the urge to speak is strongest and where the exercise of restraint builds the most power. The first is when you are angry. In the heat of anger, words rush toward the tongue like water rushing toward a breach in a dam. Everything in you wants to speak, to lash out, to wound with words as you feel wounded, to release the pressure of the emotion through verbal expression. This is precisely the moment to apply the will, to clamp down on the words before they escape, to hold the explosion within rather than allowing it to detonate. Feel the anger, acknowledge its presence, but do not give it voice. Let it burn within without consuming others. The second situation is when gossip is being shared, when someone is speaking negatively about a person not present, when the social moment invites you to contribute your own criticism or judgment. The urge to participate, to bond through shared negativity, to prove yourself part of the group by adding your voice to the chorus of complaint, this urge can be overwhelming in its subtlety. It does not feel like weakness, It feels like connection, like honesty, like justified commentary on genuine faults. But the master of the will recognizes this urge for what it is, an invitation to leak power, to squander energy that should be conserved for higher purposes. When gossip flows, let your silence be your response. The third situation is when you want to complain about your circumstances, your challenges, your difficulties, the unfairness you perceive in your treatment by life or others. Complaint is perhaps the most insidious of all speech patterns because it disguises itself as legitimate expression of genuine grievance. Surely you are entitled to voice your struggles, to seek sympathy, to share the burden of your difficulties with others who might understand. But each complaint is a confession of powerlessness, a declaration that circumstance is stronger than will, a training of your own mind in the habit of victim consciousness. Use the will to catch the complaint before it emerges and swallow it back into the silence from which it came. When you successfully restrain speech in these three situations, you build immense psychic pressure within yourself. Energy that would have been released through words is retained and compressed. This is not suppression in the unhealthy sense, not denial of what you feel, but transformation of how that feeling is expressed. Instead of dissipating into the air as sound, the energy is redirected into the strengthening of the will itself. Each word restrained is a weight lifted, each explosion contained is a repetition performed, each temptation to speak resisted is a layer of steel added to the blade of your character. The third exercise addresses the domain of action and is called the completion of the task. Its principle is absolute and admits no exception. Never leave a task half-finished once you have begun it. If you say you will do something, you must do it. If you start something, you must complete it. Even if the sky falls, even if circumstances change, even if the task seems less important than it did when you began, once begun, it must be finished. This seems extreme, perhaps even unreasonable, but its extremity is precisely what makes it effective as a training for the will. Most people live in a landscape littered with half-finished tasks, abandoned projects, broken promises to themselves and others. They begin with enthusiasm, encounter difficulty or boredom, lose the initial motivation, and quietly let the commitment die without formal acknowledgement of its death. Each such abandonment seems minor in isolation, but the accumulated effect is catastrophic for the will. The subconscious mind learns that commitments are provisional, that beginnings need not lead to completions, that the word given can be taken back when convenience suggests. This training makes the will progressively weaker, until eventually no commitment feels binding and no task feels mandatory. The completion of the task reverses this pattern by establishing an absolute rule that retrains the subconscious mind. When you adopt this practice, begin with small tasks that you are certain you can complete. Do not immediately commit to enormous projects that will test you beyond your current capacity. Instead, choose manageable tasks and complete them with perfect consistency. Make your bed and complete the task fully, not approximately. Start a book and finish it before starting another. Begin a workout routine and complete every session for the committed period. These small completions build what might be called the muscle of completion, the capacity to follow through that, once developed in small matters, can be applied to life-changing goals. The exercises of Part 3 work together as a comprehensive training system. The victory of the morning establishes your authority at the start of each day. The silent restraint builds power through conservation throughout the day. The completion of the task ensures that your actions reach their intended conclusion. Together, they address the three domains where will must be exercised: the domain of the body and its desires, the domain of speech and its impulses, and the domain of action and its completion. Neglect any one of these domains, and your development will be incomplete. Practice all three consistently, and you will forge a will of genuine power. One final counsel before we proceed to the inevitable question of failure. These exercises are not meant to be added all at once like a sudden revolution in your daily life. Such revolutions almost always fail, leaving only discouragement in their wake. Begin with one exercise, practiced with consistency until it becomes natural. Then add the second, then the third. This gradual approach respects the actual process of development, which is incremental rather than instantaneous. The person who tries to transform everything at once transforms nothing. The person who transforms one thing at a time eventually transforms everything. When you fail, and you will fail, because failure is an inevitable part of any genuine training, do not despair, and do not use the failure as justification for abandonment. Treat it exactly as you would treat a missed repetition in the gym. If you are lifting weights and fail to complete a rep, you do not throw down the barbell, declare yourself unfit for exercise, and never return to the gym. You rest for a moment, gather yourself, reduce the weight if necessary, and try again. The same response is required when you fail at an exercise of will. You slept in and missed the victory of the morning. You spoke in anger and failed at silent restraint. You left a task incomplete. Acknowledge the failure, understand what led to it, and immediately return to the practice. The failure is not the problem. Staying failed is the problem. We come now to the territory of pitfalls and dangers, the places where well-intentioned practitioners lose their way and mistake weakness for strength. The path of will development is not a simple straight line, but a narrow ridge with chasms on either side. Fall to one side and you become weak through insufficient exercise of will. Fall to the other and you become weak through a counterfeit form of will that appears strong but crumbles under genuine pressure. So understanding these errors is as important as understanding the correct practice, for many seekers fail, not through lack of effort, but through effort misdirected. The first and most significant mistake is what I warned you about at the beginning of our journey together. The error so common among those who consider themselves tough that it deserves to be revealed in full. The will of force, or what might be called the brittle will. This is the attempt to achieve outcomes through anger, obstinacy, rigidity, and stubbornness. It looks like strength from the outside. The person practicing it appears determined, unyielding, powerful in their refusal to bend. They push through obstacles through sheer aggression. They impose their will on situations through force of personality. They pride themselves on never backing down, never admitting error, never yielding an inch to opposition. But this is not true will. It is what the masters called being headstrong rather than strong-willed. The distinction is crucial. The headstrong person is governed by pride, by the need to be seen as strong, by an inability to adapt without feeling that adaptation is defeat. They mistake rigidity for resolve, stubbornness for steadfastness, aggression for assertion. Their will is like brittle iron that has not been properly tempered. It holds its shape under light pressure, giving the appearance of strength. But when genuine force is applied, when circumstances truly test it, it does not bend but shatters. The headstrong person, faced with a situation that cannot be forced, falls completely apart because they have no other mode of operation. True will is not rigid but flexible, not brittle but resilient, not aggressive but persistent. Think of the difference between glass and steel. Glass is hard, harder in fact than many types of steel. If you press lightly against glass, it seems impressively resistant, but glass cannot bend. It can only hold or break. Steel can flex under pressure, absorbing force without losing its essential integrity, returning to its shape when the pressure passes. This is the nature of true will. It can adapt to circumstances, change tactics while maintaining purpose, yield on matters of method while remaining unshakable on matters of destination. The person of true will finds another way when one way is blocked. The brittle person simply crashes against the blockage until they break. The will of force also expresses itself as the temper tantrum of the supposedly powerful, the explosion of anger when things do not go as desired. Watch someone who prides themselves on their strong will when they encounter genuine frustration. Do they remain calm, centered, seeking solutions? Or do they erupt in fury, attacking the obstacle or the people they blame for it, burning bridges and destroying relationships in their rage? This eruption is not an expression of strong will. It is evidence of a will so weak that it cannot contain itself, so poorly trained that it collapses into chaos when tested. The truly strong will remains calm precisely when calmness is most difficult, because the calmness itself is an act of will. To correct the brittle will, you must learn to distinguish between the goal and the method, between the destination and the path. Remain absolutely committed to your goals, to the vision of what you intend to create and who you intend to become. but hold your methods lightly, willing to adapt them as circumstance requires. This is not weakness, but wisdom, not capitulation, but flexibility. The water that seeks the sea does not stop when it encounters a boulder. It flows around it, always maintaining its direction while constantly adapting its course. Let your will be like water, soft in its touch, but unstoppable in its direction. The second significant mistake is exhausting the will on trifles, spending this precious resource on matters that do not advance your growth or move you toward your goals. The will, like any capacity, has limits to its daily availability. Research has shown that self-control draws on a reservoir that can be depleted through use and replenished through rest. This means that every expenditure of will is an investment that should generate returns. If you spend your will on matters of no consequence, you will have insufficient will remaining for matters that truly matter. The master conserves their will for self-conquest, not squandering it on external battles that profit nothing. Consider how much will is wasted in arguments that change nothing. You encounter someone online or in person whose opinions differ from yours. The urge arises to correct them, to prove your point, to win the argument through superior force of rhetoric. This urge feels righteous, even important, but examine its fruits. Has an internet argument ever transformed an opponent? Has a heated debate with a family member ever resulted in their genuine conversion to your view? Almost never. Yet, the energy spent in these futile conflicts is energy that will not be available for the genuine work of self-development. While you were arguing, you were not practicing. While you were trying to control another's mind, you were neglecting control of your own. The same principle applies to attempting to force others to behave as you wish them to behave. Every moment spent trying to control another person is a moment stolen from the only control that matters: control of yourself. You cannot compel anyone to change who does not wish to change. You cannot force anyone to see what they do not wish to see. The attempt to do so exhausts your will on an impossible task, while the possible task of self-transformation goes undone. Let others be as they are. Wish them well on their journey, and return your attention to the only journey you can actually walk, your own path of development. The conservation of will also requires learning to let go of the small irritations and injustices that punctuate daily life. Someone cuts you off in traffic. A co-worker takes credit for your idea. A stranger is rude for no apparent reason. These moments provoke the impulse to respond, to correct, to defend, to retaliate in ways small or large. Each such impulse is a demand on your will, either the will to act on the impulse or the will to restrain it. The master learns that most of these moments merit neither action nor restraint, but simple dismissal, a shrug of the inner shoulders that declines to engage. Not every provocation deserves your attention. Not every slight merits a response. Learn to conserve. James Allen, writing with the clarity of one who had walked this path to its heights, left a directive that serves as the cornerstone of all will development. Its words deserve to be inscribed in your memory, returned to again and again when doubt assails or difficulty discourages. Let a man realize that his life is in his own keeping, that the causes which he sets in operation in his thoughts and actions are determining his destiny, and let him assert his power to conquer. This is not mere inspiration, but precise instruction, a formula for transformation that, properly applied, cannot fail. The first element is realization, not intellectual understanding, but deep, lived recognition that your life is in your own keeping. Most people believe this theoretically while living as if it were false. They speak of self-determination while behaving as victims of circumstance. They agree philosophically that they shape their own destiny while waiting passively for destiny to shape them. This realization must penetrate from the surface of thought to the depths of being. You must know with a certainty that no argument can shake and no setback can undermine, that you are the keeper of your own existence. Not your parents, not your history, not your circumstances, not your genes, you. The second element is awareness of causation, recognition that the causes you set in operation through your thoughts and actions are even now determining your destiny. This is not future tense, but present tense. Your destiny is not determined someday. It is being determined now in this moment through what you think and do. The thought you entertained an hour ago has already contributed to your future. The action you will take after this video ends will push your life slightly, but certainly in some direction. Nothing is neutral. Everything counts. When this truth becomes vivid, when you see every moment as a crossroads and every choice as a cause, the motivation to develop the will becomes irresistible. The third element is assertion, the active claiming of your power to conquer. Realization alone is insufficient, it must lead to action. Awareness alone changes nothing, it must motivate assertion. Alan's word choice is deliberate. Assert, not hope for, not wish for, not passively await. The power to conquer your weaknesses, your limitations, your undeveloped potential. This power must be actively claimed, reached for, grasped, and exercised. No one will give it to you. No circumstance will automatically bestow it. You must assert it. And the assertion itself is an act of will that strengthens the capacity for future assertion. To conquer, in Alan's meaning, is not to conquer others or external circumstances, but to conquer the only adversary that truly threatens you, your own lower nature, your own undisciplined tendencies, your own preference for ease over growth. This is the true battlefield, and this is where the true victory must be won. External triumphs built on internal defeat are hollow and temporary. External defeats accompanied by internal victory are stepping stones to eventual external triumph. The order of conquest must be inner first, outer second. Let a man conquer himself and the world conspires to place crowns upon his head. The directive also implies responsibility, the willingness to bear the weight of self-determination without complaint or excuse. If your life is in your own keeping, you cannot blame others for its condition. If your thoughts and actions determine your destiny, you cannot attribute your outcomes to luck or injustice. This responsibility feels heavy to those who prefer the comfort of victimhood, but it is actually the key to freedom. Only when you accept complete responsibility can you access complete power. As long as you believe others control your fate, you surrender the capacity to change it. Accept the burden and you inherit the throne. Alan's teaching also points toward the proper object of the will, not the domination of external reality, but the development of internal capacity. Many people misuse their will in the attempt to control what cannot be controlled, exhausting themselves in battles that cannot be won. The master directs will toward the only conquest that is both possible and sufficient, the conquest of self. Win this victory and all other victories become either achievable or unnecessary. Lose this battle and no other triumph can compensate. There is only one war, and it is fought within the territory of your own being. The final element hidden in Alan's directive is the optimistic assumption that conquest is possible. He does not say if a man can conquer, but implicitly assumes that he can, that the power is there waiting to be asserted, that the victory is available to anyone willing to claim it. This is not blind optimism, but realistic assessment of human potential. The will can be developed, the self can be conquered, the destiny can be forged according to the vision of the forger. These are not hopes but facts, demonstrated by every human being who has walked this path to its conclusion. What has been done can be done again. What they achieved, you can achieve. Carry Alan's directive with you as a torch in dark moments, a compass when the path seems unclear, a standard under which you rally when the battle turns against you. Return to it when doubt whispers that the work is futile, when weariness suggests you should abandon the effort, when the voice of the old self promises comfort in exchange for surrender. Let a man realize. Let him recognize the causes he sets in operation. Let him assert his power to conquer. This is the formula, this is the path, this is the will secret that molds every destiny. We have walked together through ancient wisdom, through metaphors of ships and forges and battlefields. Now let us bridge this timeless understanding to the most modern discoveries of science. For when wisdom and science align, we stand on ground that cannot be shaken. What James Allen understood intuitively, what the masters taught through tradition and experience, neuroscience has now confirmed through rigorous investigation. Willpower is not merely a philosophical concept, but a measurable biological function, and the exercises we have discussed are not merely spiritual practices, but methods of literally restructuring the brain. The seat of what we call will in the language of the masters, science calls the prefrontal cortex. That region of the brain located just behind your forehead, the latest structure to evolve in the human brain and the last to fully develop in each individual life. This is the executive center of your being, the part of you that plans, that evaluates, that inhibits impulses, that keeps long-term goals in view when short-term temptations beckon. When you exercise your will to resist a craving, to maintain focus against distraction, to choose the difficult right over the easy wrong, it is the prefrontal cortex that does this work, overriding the more primitive regions of the brain that seek immediate gratification. The key insight from neuroscience is that the brain is not fixed but plastic, constantly reshaping itself in response to how it is used. The neural pathways you activate frequently become stronger and more efficient. The pathways you neglect become weaker and eventually disappear. This means that every time you exercise your will, you are not merely making a choice in that moment, but physically strengthening the neural architecture that supports future exercises of will. The discipline of today creates the capacity for the discipline of tomorrow. You are literally building your brain through the practices we have discussed. When you wake up and immediately engage in the victory of the morning, forcing yourself to act against the wishes of your comfort-seeking self, you are activating your prefrontal cortex first thing in the day and strengthening its connections through use. When you practice silent restraint, catching the impulse to speak and holding it back, you are training the prefrontal cortex in impulse inhibition, one of its most important functions. When you complete tasks you have started, you are reinforcing the neural patterns associated with sustained effort and goal-directed behavior. This is not metaphor. This is the actual mechanism by which change occurs. Research has demonstrated that consistent meditation practice, which is fundamentally an exercise of will applied to attention, increases the density of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex. Studies have shown that people who regularly exercise self-control show measurable increases in the neural activity and structural development of their executive regions. The brain of the disciplined person is physically different from the brain of the undisciplined person, and this difference is not genetic destiny, but the result of accumulated practice. You are not stuck with the brain you currently have. You are building the brain you will have tomorrow. This understanding provides both explanation and motivation. It explains why the development of will feels so difficult at first. You are working with neural pathways that have not been well developed, trying to activate a capacity that has been allowed to atrophy through disuse. The difficulty you experience is not evidence of your inadequacy, but evidence of your starting point, a measure of how much development is possible. It motivates because it assures you that the effort is not merely psychological, but structural, that every exercise leaves a physical trace in your brain, that you are genuinely rebuilding yourself from the inside out. The prefrontal cortex serves as the brake system for the more primitive parts of your brain that evolved long before self-control was necessary for survival. These older regions respond to immediate stimuli with immediate reactions. See food, eat food, feel fear, flee or fight, experience pleasure, seek more pleasure. They are powerful and fast, and they served our ancestors well in environments where such immediate responses were adaptive. But in the modern world, where the greatest threats are not predators but bad decisions, and the greatest opportunities require sustained effort, these primitive responses often lead us astray. The will functioning through the prefrontal cortex is the capacity to override these automatic responses when they do not serve your long-term interests. It is the ability to see the chocolate cake and decide not to eat it, to feel the urge to scroll social media and choose to study instead, to experience the desire to lash out in anger and maintain composure. This override function is not suppression in the sense of denial, it is governance, the higher self managing the lower self for the benefit of the whole being. When you strengthen the prefrontal cortex through exercise of will, you are increasing your capacity for this essential governance. The implications extend beyond individual acts of self-control to the overall quality of your life. Research links prefrontal cortex function to outcomes across virtually every domain: academic and professional success, relationship stability, physical health, mental well-being, even longevity. The person with a well-developed executive center makes better decisions in every area, not through superior intelligence in the traditional sense, but through superior self-regulation. They see the same temptations as everyone else, but respond to them differently. They face the same obstacles but navigate them more effectively. This is the will advantage, and it is available to anyone willing to train for it. There is a phenomenon neuroscience has identified called ego depletion, the observation that willpower appears to function like a muscle that can be fatigued through use. Studies show that people who have recently exercised self-control in one domain show reduced self-control in subsequent tasks. This finding aligns perfectly with the teaching about conserving will and not wasting it on trifles. Your daily supply of willpower is limited. Spending it on matters of no consequence leaves insufficient reserves for matters that truly matter. This is not weakness but biology, and the wise person works with this biology rather than against it. However, and this is crucial, the muscle analogy extends further. Just as physical muscles can be strengthened through progressive training, the capacity for self-control can be increased through consistent exercise. Regular practice of willpower does not merely maintain but actually grows the underlying capacity. Studies have shown that people who undertake willpower training, through practices very similar to those we have discussed, show increased self-control not only in the trained domain, but across all areas of their lives. The development generalizes, spilling over from the specific exercises into overall enhancement of self-regulatory capacity. What Allen called the will and what neuroscience calls prefrontal cortex function are the same phenomenon viewed through different lenses. Neither lens is complete without the other. The wisdom tradition provides meaning, purpose, and practical guidance. The scientific tradition provides mechanism, validation, and measurable outcomes. When you practice the exercises of this teaching, you are simultaneously engaging in spiritual development as the masters understood it, and in brain training as modern neuroscience has mapped it. You are walking an ancient path with the confirmation of contemporary science lighting your way. Let us bring these principles to life through the story of transformation, not a tale of ancient heroes, but of ordinary struggle and extraordinary change. Consider someone who might have been you, who might still be you before this teaching takes root. A person trapped in the cage of bad habits, feeling helpless against patterns that seem to control them rather than the other way around. This is the story of awakening that illustrates how the principles we have discussed operate in actual human experience. This person woke each morning in defeat, already behind before the day began. The alarm would sound, and instead of rising, they would reach for their phone, beginning the day by feeding their attention to other people's dramas and a stream of content designed to capture rather than liberate. By the time they finally dragged themselves from bed, half the morning had disappeared into the digital void, and the sense of being controlled by their device rather than controlling it colored everything that followed. Each day started with a small surrender that set the tone for larger surrenders to come. Their eating habits compounded the sense of powerlessness. They knew what they should eat and what they should avoid, but this knowledge changed nothing. The sugar called, and they answered. The fast food beckoned, and they obeyed. Each meal felt like a referendum on their worth, a test they kept failing, a reminder that they could not trust themselves to do what they knew was right. And layered on top was a deep, pervasive laziness that turned every potential action into a negotiation with a part of themselves that always won, always found the excuse, always provided the rationalization for doing nothing. They read self-help books. They watched videos like this one. They understood intellectually exactly what they needed to do, but understanding and doing remained separated by a chasm they could not bridge. The knowledge sat in their mind while their behavior continued unchanged, and this gap between knowing and doing was perhaps the most painful aspect of their condition. It was not ignorance, but impotence, not confusion, but captivity. They knew the prison, could see the walls clearly, and yet the door seemed locked from the inside. The change began, as real changes always do, with something small. Having encountered the teaching of the victory of the morning, they decided on a single practice, making their bed immediately upon waking before anything else. This was not glamorous. It did not feel like the beginning of a transformation. It felt like a tiny, almost embarrassingly trivial act that could not possibly matter. But they committed to it completely, not as an experiment to try, but as a law they would not break, and they began. The first day was harder than expected. The pull toward the phone was almost physical, and the bed seemed to make itself irrelevant compared to the urgent stimulation of the screen. But they remembered the teaching and acted anyway, hands moving to straighten sheets while the mind screamed for distraction. It took 2 minutes. They felt almost nothing, and yet something had shifted. They had begun the day with an act of will rather than an act of surrender. The pattern, invisible but powerful, had been interrupted. Days accumulated into weeks, and the bed was made every morning without fail. What had required effort became easier, though it never became entirely automatic. And something strange began to happen. The small victory spread. Having established that they could do one thing through will, the possibility of doing other things opened. They added a short walk around the block before checking their phone. Then they eliminated sugar from breakfast. Each addition was small, each new discipline modest, but they were building something larger than any individual act. They were building the muscle of completion, the capacity to finish what they started, and to keep the promises they made to themselves. Months passed, and the person who could not control their phone usage was now someone who did not check it until after a morning routine that included exercise, meditation, and a healthy breakfast. The person who surrendered to every craving had lost 30 pounds and felt energy they had forgotten was possible. The person who felt helpless against their own habits had become someone whose friends asked their secret, who co-workers envied for their discipline, who looked in the mirror and recognized a stranger made familiar through transformation. The secret, if it can be called a secret, was never hidden. It was simply this. They built the will through small, consistent victories, starting where they were with what they had, never demanding sudden transformation, but accepting gradual development. They treated failures not as evidence of permanent inadequacy, but as missed repetitions to be attempted again immediately. They conserved their will for self-conquest, rather than wasting it on attempts to control what could not be controlled. And slowly, incrementally, invisibly at first and then undeniably, they changed. What they discovered, and what you will discover if you follow this path, is that the will is not a fixed quantity you either have or lack. It is a capacity that grows with exercise, a muscle that strengthens with use, a neural network that densifies with activation. The gap between who you are and who you could be is not fixed, but responsive. The cage whose bars seem unbreakable is in fact the creation of your own weakness, and as strength grows, the bars thin and eventually disappear. Small victories lead to total victory. This is the path. This is the possibility. This is what awaits. We arrive now at the summit of our journey, the place where all the paths we have walked converge into a single, powerful understanding. Let us gather together what we have learned, not as separate teachings, but as facets of a unified truth, for the power of this wisdom lies not in any single element, but in the synthesis of all elements into a way of being that transforms every aspect of existence. The will is the helm of the ship of your life, the point of leverage through which your direction becomes your choice, rather than the accident of circumstance. Without a hand on this helm, you drift with every current that flows, pushed by forces you did not choose toward destinations you did not select. With your hand firmly grasping this helm, you cut through the waves with purpose, using the very forces that would have controlled you as power for your chosen journey. The question is never whether the currents will flow or the winds will blow. The question is only whether you will steer or be carried. The will is the hammer of the blacksmith, who forges destiny from the raw metal of thought in the fire of circumstance. Your thoughts are the material, holding infinite potential but no inherent form. Your circumstances provide the heat that makes transformation possible. But without the hammer's strike, the material simply melts and deforms, shaped by default into whatever randomness results from heat without direction. The person of will takes up the hammer and strikes with intention, repetition, and force, creating from chaos a blade capable of cutting through any obstacle life presents. The exercises we have explored are not arbitrary tasks, but precise practices targeting the 3 domains where will must be cultivated. The victory of the morning establishes sovereignty over the body and its preference for comfort. The silent restraint develops mastery over speech and its dangerous impulse toward expression. The completion of the task builds the capacity for sustained action and the sacred keeping of promises to oneself. Together, these practices create a comprehensive training system that, followed with consistency, cannot fail to develop the will to formidable levels. The mistakes we have examined are not unfortunate accidents, but predictable hazards on a known path. The brittle will that confuses stubbornness with strength, rigidity with resolve, aggression with assertion, this counterfeited will must be recognized and rejected in favor of the true will that is flexible yet unbreakable, calm yet irresistible, adaptive in method yet absolute in purpose. The exhaustion of will on trifles, the wasting of this precious resource on battles that cannot be won and victories that profit nothing. This too must be recognized and corrected through the conservation of energy for the only conquest that matters, the conquest of self. You are not a leaf blowing in the wind, tumbling wherever the gusts of circumstance decree, powerless against forces you cannot see and did not summon. This is the lie your weakness tells you, the story your undeveloped will spins to justify its abdication. The truth is far more powerful and far more demanding. You are the wind, not the leaf that is blown, but the force that blows, not the effect of causes outside yourself, but the cause of effects that ripple outward into reality. This is your nature when you awaken to it, your power when you claim it, your destiny when you forge it with the hammer of your will. Stop waiting for motivation to arrive like a guest whose visit you cannot control. Motivation is fickle, arising from sources you do not understand and departing on schedules you cannot predict. It comes when circumstances happen to align, when moods happen to favor action, when the stars happen to configure in patterns of enthusiasm, and when it leaves, as it always leaves, you are stranded, waiting again for the next visit, hoping the guest will return before the opportunity passes. This is no way to build a life. This is no way to forge a destiny. This is surrender disguised as strategy. Will is eternal where motivation is temporary. Will does not depend on feeling like it, on circumstances supporting it, on the alignment of factors beyond your control. Will is the decision to act regardless of feeling, the commitment to continue regardless of circumstance, the assertion of power that does not ask permission from your moods. When you shift from motivation dependence to will dependence, you step out of the weather and into the climate, out of the fluctuations of the moment into the steady direction of the lifetime. This is freedom. This is power. This is mastery. Pick up the hammer of your will. Feel its weight in your hand, the solidity of this instrument that has always been available to you, waiting only for you to grasp it. The hammer has been lying in the dust while you searched for easier methods, gentler approaches, paths of transformation that required no effort and demanded no sacrifice. There are no such paths. There never were. The hammer is the only tool that shapes the metal, and the metal will not shape itself regardless of how long you wait or how sincerely you wish. Strike the iron of your mind while it is hot, while the fire of your current challenges has heated it to malleability. Every difficulty you face is not an obstacle to your growth, but the heat necessary for transformation. Your struggles are not evidence that life is against you, but proof that life is working with you, providing the conditions under which change becomes possible. The fire is already lit. You did not have to build it. The metal is already heating. You did not have to place it in the flames. All that remains is for you to pick up the hammer and strike. Forge a character so strong that destiny itself has no choice but to bow before it. This is not arrogance but accuracy, not presumption but proper understanding of how reality operates. The universe responds to strength, reorganizes itself around directed intention, opens pathways before the person who moves with certainty toward chosen goals. This is not mysticism, but mechanism, the way things work for those who work the way things work. Build the strength of will and watch doors open that you did not know existed. Forge the character of mastery and observe how circumstances conspire to provide what the master requires. You have been asleep, and this video has been an alarm. You have been drifting, and this teaching has been a call to the helm. You have been letting the metal cool in the fire unshaped, and this wisdom has been a hand pressing the hammer toward your grasp. The decision that remains is yours alone. Will you continue as you have been, or will you begin the work of transformation that begins in this moment and continues for the rest of your life? The tools have been provided. The path has been mapped. The only missing element is your choice. I leave you not with passive inspiration but with active challenge, for knowledge without application is entertainment, and we are not here to be entertained, but to be transformed. The challenge is called the Day of Silence, and it will test whether you have received these teachings as concepts or as commitments. If you accept this challenge and complete it, you will know through direct experience what the will can do when it is engaged. If you refuse this challenge or attempt it and fail, you will know where you truly stand and how much work remains. Here is the challenge. Choose one day in the coming week, designate it as your day of silence, and set a single intention for that day. From the moment you wake until the moment you sleep, you will not speak a single negative word. No complaints, regardless of what frustrations arise. No criticisms, regardless of what failures you observe in others. No gossip, regardless of what invitations come. No self-pity, regardless of what difficulties you encounter. You will catch every negative word before it leaves your lips and swallow it back into the silence from which it arose. This is not a vow of total silence, but something far more difficult. Selective silence. The exercise of will, to distinguish between what serves and what destroys, to speak what builds and withhold what tears down. You may speak as much as you wish, but nothing you say will carry negative energy into the world. You will observe the urge to complain arise, and you will stop it. You will feel the pull toward criticism, and you will redirect it. You will notice the temptation to speak ill, and you will choose otherwise. Every restraint is a repetition that strengthens your will. Every word caught and held is a weight lifted in the gym of self-mastery. As the day progresses, if you pursue this challenge with integrity, you will feel something building within you. The energy that would have been released through negative speech is being retained and compressed. You are creating psychic pressure, stored power that will seek release through channels of your choosing rather than channels of your conditioning. By the end of the day, you will know something about yourself and about the will that no teaching could communicate through words alone. You will have experienced the power of silent restraint directly, and that experience will be worth more than 1,000 explanations. If you are ready to stop drifting and start steering, if you are prepared to pick up the hammer and strike, if you choose to be the wind rather than the leaf, then there is one action that signals your commitment. Subscribe to the Master's legacy and take command of your soul. This is not about building an audience, but about building a community of those who walk this path together, who draw strength from knowing that others are also doing the work, who return to these teachings when the fire burns low and the hammer feels heavy. Comment below the words we established at the beginning of our pact together. I am the Master. Let this declaration be not a boast, but a commitment, not a claim about where you are, but a statement of where you are going. You are the master in potential. Through the development of will, you will become the master in actuality. The journey from one to the other is the journey of a lifetime, and it begins with the single step of this declaration. You are not what you have been. You are what you choose to become. Choose mastery. Choose will. Choose the forge. The wisdom of James Allen reaches across more than a century to find you in this moment, to offer you the key that unlocks the prison you have built around yourself with your own weakness. The key has been placed in your hand. The lock awaits your turning. What you do next will determine whether this video was a moment of entertainment or a moment of transformation, whether these words were sounds that faded or seeds that grew. The choice is yours. It has always been yours. And now that you know the power of the will, you know that it will always be yours. Take command, forge your destiny, and may the strength you build serve not only yourself, but all those whose lives you will touch with the power of your transformed character.